was a tall lady before me. Tilt this down a little bit. How are you doing? You're hanging out there. You're still here. Thank you for staying. I was born and raised in Buffalo, New York. Is there anybody out there who's been to Buffalo, New York? You have my deepest sympathy. Buffalo's very different than Phoenix, Arizona. It's snow 9 months out of the year instead of sun all of the time. And my parents decided that it would be a great place to raise a family. My dad was from Lenore, North Carolina. My mother was from Shaker Heights, Ohio. And they picked someplace in between to raise children. And so they picked Buffalo, New York to start. And they decided that they would like to have lots of kids. Now, my mother only had a brother. My father had 15 siblings, 9 sisters. So when they said they wanted to have a big family, what they really meant was a big family. 3 girls and 3 boys. And so what they did was try to raise those kids in the inner city. And that was kind of a tough job because the inner city became really kind of a dangerous place. When we were little kids, my mother said she could tell right away that there was something different about this one. It just so happened that my older brother, Rose, and my brother, Byron, got into some trouble. And they were about to get what was fondly called back then a whooping. My dad took off his belt. My mother said I was still pretty little. I wasn't really talking much. And I toddled over in my walker, got in between my dad and my brother and my sister, and went, "Ah!" My mom said, "I think that one's going to be a lawyer." Not long after, we moved to the country. And we moved to the country because, number one, the inner city was getting more and more dangerous, but also the schools were a lot better. The country was very different, Lancaster, New York, about 45 minutes outside of Buffalo, than Buffalo. There was cats and dogs and chickens and pigs. There was animals of every kind. But there were no black people. Really, no black people. That made for a very interesting experience. Now remember, there were 6 of us, 3 girls, 3 boys. Byron, Bynum, Brenda, Robin, Rose, Rich, you're out there. And that meant that in our elementary school, Parker Elementary School, there was 1 Thomas in every grade, 1st grade through 6th grade. So if you happened to be passing through town and you weren't a Thomas, it didn't matter because people assumed that you were a Thomas. And in our view, we were the Black Brady Bunch. A year apart. So I was Jan, of course. I was the middle girl. And what that meant was that when we were moving around town, it was a different experience, not just for us, but for them. What do I mean? If my little brother went out to ride his bicycle, usually a police officer brought him home. We'd knock on the door. "Mrs. Thompson." "Yes." "Is this your son?" "Yes." "Is this his bicycle?" "Yes." "Have a good evening, Mom." He probably got escorted home riding his bicycle 10 or 15 times. On Halloween, we would go out and trick or treat. Now, first of all, it's kind of a feat to trick or treat in Lancaster because houses are so far apart. You have to be an athlete to get from house to house. But we would go from house to house trick or treating with our friends, and people would ask us over and over again, trick or treat, and they would say, "Oh, how wonderful. Do you live near here? Where do you go to school? Who interviews kids on Halloween?" I couldn't understand why they weren't admiring my lovely handmade witch costume and were asking me all these questions about where I lived and where I went to school. And one evening, our whole family was out shopping at a local strip mall, because back then that's all there was strip malls. There were no mega malls and places with palm trees and all those sort of glamorous things you see nowadays. And my little brother disappeared to go to the bathroom, and he didn't come back. So the whole family went to go look for him. When we got outside, we saw my little brother up against a wall with his hands like this. He was only 6. There was a police car with its lights on him and an officer shaking his hand at him, and my little brother was terrified. Now, my father, at this point, who'd been raised in the Deep South, and had come to the East and the Northeast because he thought it was a different kind of place to raise his family. He was extremely angry. And he had been a security guard, was still a security guard. He knew the local sheriff, knew the chief of the police, and he made the officer get on his radio and call his boss. He knew his boss. And the officer had to apologize to our entire family. And my father said to him, I want you to look at every one of these kids, look at their faces, and remember their faces. These are the Thomas children, and they do not steal. Now, here's the thing. I'm pretty sure that after that, he did remember who we were. But how could he possibly forget there was only one black family in town? It wasn't that hard. And what do you do when you have 6 kids for fun? Well, when you don't have a lot of money, even though we didn't know it, you can't go out to dinner a lot, you can't go to the movies, all those things cost too much money. So you take your kids to the library. My mother took us to the library every weekend. We had a little red wagon and 6 kids, and we could take out up to 6 books. So we were bringing 36 books home and reading them as fast as we could. And my sister Robin is not here today. Her daughter Stacia is. But Stacia, your mom and I had a competition running. We would take out the same books and see who could read them first. And we would not put those books down. We would carry books to the dinner table, be eating and reading. And we wanted to be the first one to finish the book that we had in front of us. And I read all kinds of books. I read A Wrinkle in Time and Charlotte's Web and the Nancy Drew mysteries. I would literally, when the family went to sleep at night, and believe me, it really was like the Brady Bunch because we had girls' rooms and boys' rooms and a bathroom in between. All the lights were off, and there was nothing but starlight and moonlight outside as snow was falling. And I was hiding in the bathroom with the bathroom light on and my granny gown over the heating vent so it would blow warm air. And I would read until the wee hours of the morning. And I learned about so many things that have helped me today. Not just books, but magazines, Popular Mechanics, Ladies' Home Journal, cookbooks. Got into trouble a couple times because in home ec, the teacher told me that I could not double a chocolate chip cook recipe. And I went home and I told my mom that the home ec teacher said I can't double a chocolate chip cookie recipe. And my mother said, she just doesn't know any better. She didn't realize that I had quadrupled the chocolate chip cookie recipe, that I had memorized it because my mother had to make 36 lunches every week. We made cookies 100 at a time. We didn't ever make a single batch of chocolate chip cookies. And one of the people that I got to learn about was Martin Luther King. And I learned about him because my mother was so proud of him, and she told me about what he had done for so many people, and especially for children, so that we could go to school and have friends that were all different races. My best friend, Sarah, was a little white girl who had the blondest, longest hair all the way down to here, who was actually teased by her classmates for being too white. My other best friend was a Korean girl named Caroline Park. And so I had so many different friends. And what happened was, we decided it was Martin Luther King's birthday, and my mother and I wrote information about him that I could go to school and over the PA system read so that other kids would know about him. They had George Washington's birthday, Abraham Lincoln's birthday, why not Martin Luther King's birthday? So I got all dressed up, I went to school, went to the office, and told the ladies in the office that I was going to read information about Martin Luther King. I was so excited. And the ladies in the office said, no, you're not. They said, if you would like to celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday, you can just go home. So I called my mother and I said, Mom, you need to come and get me. The ladies in the office said I can't read the announcement that if I want to celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday that I should just go home. And my mother said, you're not going home, it's a school day. She said, you go on down to your homeroom. And I did. I went there and I was actually extremely distressed. I sat down at my desk. I wasn't really paying attention to anybody around me. I was looking down at my desk and really doing the best that I could not to cry. And then all of a sudden I heard somebody over the intercom talking about Martin Luther King. It was my mother. How's that possible? I'm sure she probably violated every possible traffic law, must have driven there at 90 miles an hour. and made sure that the people of Parker Elementary School got to learn about an extremely important man for all of us, Martin Luther King. What I've learned, there's so many things that I've learned. I'm going to say this because my little brother who's over there was teasing me when we were sitting down to lunch, and he said, "Are you going to tell people that you went to Yale Law School?" He said, "You know, it's probably not a good time to talk about Yale." And Rich, I know that's true. But also, I'm going to say this to you. You don't have to go to law school to be an advocate. I learned how to be an advocate almost every day of my life because of the people who advocated for me. And when I think about law school, I think about smart women. I think about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I think about Sonia Sotomayor. I think about Sandra Day O'Connor. I think about Mary Thomas, my mother. When you think about Yale Law School, think about a young black girl who went to law school after attending public schools her whole life, who represented Native American women and children. One of my clients was somebody who was mopping floors, and every day her boss went by and kicked her. I remember representing somebody who got kicked out of school for truancy, and the reason they couldn't go to school is because they only had one pair of pants and one shirt. They would wash their clothes by hand. They had no electricity. They had no running water. It took 3 days for their clothes to dry. You can't punish people for being poor who are trying to make something of themselves. So when you think of Yale Law School, think of me. I am an advocate. Who do I advocate for? Humanity. Join me.